So,
all right,
yeah,
Mike
I think
Rogers.
so.
Let's have a conversation. What do you got for me?
Aside from the epic trolling last night of of Hillary by the Trump campaign, I thought it was incredible that she would try to irritate him by bringing the obnoxious Mark Cuban as one of her front row guests. And lo and behold, and I suspect there was some collusion there in the background. Trump says, well, I'm going to invite Jennifer Flowers, and she immediately tweets back, I'm in your corner, Donald, kiss. So I think that was a big setup, and I think Hillary got master trolled there by the Trump campaign.
Well,
I see that Pence,
so.
I see that Pence is out there on the Sunday show saying, no, she's not really going to come.
Well,
no,
I think it would be great if they were all there, just kind of sitting in the front somewhere.
Yeah, Kathleen Willey, what a wonderful name. Juanita Broderick, Lewinsky, sucking on a Cuban, whatever,
The whole list of them. Just bring them all in and have them all sitting up there. Everybody, all those so-called bimbos.
Well, actually, what I saw from some of the commentary out on the web is people thought that a far better idea would be to bring some of the Benghazi moms and dads and have them sitting there silently accusing Clinton from the front row.
They'll bring them too. Not one or the other, both.
Yeah, so it'll be really interesting to see whether Donald has got something up his sleeve that he's not talking about. I mean, it's hard to imagine Trump having something that he doesn't talk about beforehand, but yeah, it's possible. It's possible. He is, after all, a showman, and I think Hillary's terrified because she doesn't know how this is going to play out.
If there's been a narrative, it's that there isn't one. Trump is doing things differently from the way the consultants would have him do it, or the pundits, or the leaders of major periodicals. They all want him to behave a certain way, and he absolutely refuses, and he's been successful doing it his way, so there's no reason for him to stop.
Yeah. By the way, it must have hurt. Did you watch Close Up this week? Jennifer Horn versus Buckles on who's got the better slate of candidates?
Well, you can fill us in if you saw it.
It was pretty good. I mean, Buckles is lying about the experience of his candidates and how they're going to sweep the field and how Hillary at the top of the slate's going to be good for him and all that stuff. And Jennifer trying to say what a great voting record Ayotte's got. To her credit, she expects Trump to do just fine, and she wasn't going to get caught saying any bad words against him. Although I think, thinking of post-primary, I did hear that somebody asked Ayotte if she'd revised her opinion that Frank Ginter should resign, and she said she had not. I think if Kelly loses, part of what it will be is the fact that she's not willing to embrace the people's choice. She wasn't willing to embrace the people's choice of policies. She's not willing to embrace the fact that the people have decided that they'd rather have Frank Ginter than be told who to vote for. And she can't bring herself to embrace Donald Trump. And, it's kind of curious in the primaries, the candidates that were perfectly happy to embrace Donald Trump tended to punch above their weight in the primary voting.
I think Kelly's problem is that her advisors and people in the Senate that she listens to have all told her, and I imagine that this is a lot like the situation was with Bill O'Brien. She thinks, or somebody has told her, that the whatever luggage these other people have, that she's going to have to carry it in her race. I just think that's what she's doing.
And I think it'll actually reduce her safety margin, not increase it. But, be that as it may, she's slightly more friendly to us for things like Supreme Court nominees than, say, Hassan would be. The state has the difficult decision, or the voters have a difficult decision. Do they gin up enough enthusiasm for Ayotte over Hassan, or if a handful of them stay home, do they let Hassan go on down and damage the Republican majority? There's no good answer because we don't really want Kelly in there, but we even more fervently don't want Hassan in there. And then there's Sununu versus Van Osten. Buckles was mercilessly cruel in pointing out that the number of customers at Waterville has gone down to about half since Chris got the property.
Wait, does that mean let's analyze that? That means that if he's the governor, we could expect half as many people at the government trough. That would be awesome.
Wouldn't that just be nice if that happened?
That's not how it's going to work. And of course, I could see why Ray Buckley would be against that, because he wants more people at the trough, and Chris is clearly a threat to that. Not much of a threat, if you ask me, but he kind of is, and they wouldn't have power for the first time in the corner office since 2004, 2005, something like that.
Yeah, it's been a long time. Yeah, 18 out of the last 20 years have been Democrat or something. Jennifer parried that one quite well, too, pointing out the thinness of Van Osten's business experience and how he was basically given an easy job at Stonyfield just so that he could say he'd got business experience. Again, choices, not very good ones, but even with the last name that's been around New Hampshire politics for too long, I'd still rather have Chris Sununu in the corner office than Colin Van Osten.
I will sadly take any Republican governor over any Democrat governor at this point.
Yeah, exactly. So, what
were you loading up while we were waiting? What do you got for me?
Well, so I've been looking at some of the background. There's a lot of parallels between what's happening with Trump this year, where everybody's shying away from him, or everybody that's in the establishment is shying away from him, and what happened to Goldwater. Goldwater was kind of outspoken. He said a couple of things early on the campaign trail that clearly weren't his philosophy. Interestingly, his foreign policy philosophy is remarkably similar to Trump's, in as much as he wanted the military to be bulked up and the foreign entanglements to be minimized. He was thoroughly against getting involved in Vietnam just before, Kennedy, Johnson got us totally embroiled there. And then, of course, Nixon got to inherit that. And it wasn't a very clean exit. But that's one thing I'm not going to blame Nixon for, because the Democrats basically sabotaged the war effort.
Well, leaving him with funding it?
Yeah. Leaving him with nothing to do really but to try and get out with some sort of grace before it collapsed. It was a real mess. But I discovered some interesting things. It turns out that the elder statesman that might be voting for Hillary was a Goldwater guy in his youth, as was, of course, Hillary herself, a Goldwater gal. Yes, H.W. was a pretty severe conservative when he first got into politics and into Congress, and was a supporter of Goldwater, whereas Romney Sr., Rockefeller Sr., and Scranton were all, they were the bigwigs of the day in the Republican Party, were all fervently against Goldwater. So when Goldwater won the nomination, these people wouldn't do anything to help, and pretty much let it be known they didn't feel he should be trusted with the nuclear buttons. Where have you heard that recently? It just sounds so similar. And what I want to remind people is, if you want to be strict, puritanical, ideological, Goldwater was far more conservative than Trump. I'm not trying to paint Trump as the perfect ideological conservative. What I'm saying is he's what we've got. He has put forth now 2 lists of potential Supreme Court justices, all way, way better than anything a Democrat would propose, even right up there with justices that Ted Cruz might propose. He has got a tax plan that makes some sort of sense, and give or take possible entitlement with for child credit. I don't think that there's that much wrong with his proposals. And so, we've got that versus another big government liberal. And what we have to remember is that by contributing to the defeat of Goldwater, the Republican Party and its mostly liberal / neocon bigwigs, the ones that never saw a war they didn't like to fund, and were perfectly happy to go along with the Democrats' expansion of government, those same people effectively enabled the Vietnam War and the Great Society and the war on poverty that Lyndon Johnson brought us. And, looking ahead, moving ahead 50 years, just look what a mess we have now as a result of those policies. And let us not forget Goldwater's most ardent supporter. And by the way, Nixon was in Goldwater's camp too, which turned out to be, I think, fortuitous 4 years later. But the most ardent supporter, the man whose broadcasts from 1964 are still replayed today, was Ronald Reagan. The time for choosing speech that he delivered during the closing phases of the 1964 campaign was one of the most impassioned cries against distant and tyrannical government, against government programs sapping the will of the people to fend for themselves. It was magnificent. It basically foretold the way Medicare and Medicaid would balloon on us, and they did.
I wonder how Goldwater would have done if he had Facebook and Twitter and social media and the internet. You have to wonder, given the contrasts, because most of Trump's support is hidden by the media. People who don't really watch anything other than ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and maybe MSNBC don't know. I mean, they may hear rumors from people in social media that Trump has these huge turnouts and he has all these people who didn't used to be registered voters who have come back because they're excited about the possibility of voting for somebody who isn't one of those rhinos or one of those Democrats. And it's a different day. It's a different age. So, I mean, while there are very obviously similarities, and of course, I don't think Trump could ever be as conservative as Goldwater, you have to wonder how it would have been different if he had had the same open media experience that we have today.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. And, I've generally been somewhat of a war hawk. I certainly like to stamp out trouble spots. But all these little conflagrations around the world that we get ourselves into, indeed, we even create in some cases, that there's no need for us to be involved in. The various Crapistans of the Middle East are going to still be just the same in 20 or 30 years as they are now. The names in the government buildings will have changed. The people in the political prisons will have changed. But essentially, it'll still be a hellhole, unless they embrace Christianity or something. But without Rush Limbaugh and Ann Coulter as president and VP, that's not going to happen.
I don't even know if they would do it, but I mean,
as in invade their countries, convert them to, replace their leaders and convert them to Christianity.
There is something to be said for carpet bombing. Carpet bombing was effective. It demoralized the populace. It destroyed infrastructure. It made life miserable for the people who were propping up whoever it was that was being a nuisance. And I'm not saying we should return to that. I think smart bombs are great. You get good video and everything. But, if you don't hurt your enemy, they're never going to stop.
No, that's true. But, we don't need to get into every little conflagration everywhere. Bashar Assad is horrid, but he wasn't persecuting Christians the way ISIS is.
Libya wasn't the disaster it is now with Gaddafi there.
Libya wasn't the same disaster. The foreign oil companies were making a profit there to the mutual benefit of themselves and the government of Libya. And having had the demonstration of what could happen to you if you ticked off Uncle Sam, courtesy of the deposition of Saddam Hussein, Gaddafi wasn't going to bother anybody. So we picked a fight we didn't need to pick. And, same thing in Egypt.
I was going to say,
We pushed to remove a perfectly good president of military sponsorship, yes, who at least was stabilizing the country and stamping out the Muslim Brotherhood. And we pushed to replace him with a president elected by the Muslim Brotherhood.
Well,
and that
after
didn't work.
Seeing Trevor's movie, we know why.
Well, we do know why. Not only are too many congressmen and senators bought and paid for by some combination of the Communist Party USA and front organizations for the Muslim Brotherhood, but let us not forget that the current, and if we're not careful, the future president, are owned and operated by the Muslim Brotherhood. Valerie Jarrett has connections back to Iran, and family connections to the Muslim Brotherhood.
Don't forget
Huma Abedin or Huma Danger or Huma Wiener or whatever she chooses to be, since she's no doubt separating from the never mind, words fail me, from Anthony.
Pretty good.
Yes. She has connections to the Muslim Brotherhood, and her mother has connections to the Muslim Brotherhood. How can this not be bad for the country? And how can it not be, frankly, treason for our high officials to employ these people as their top advisors? It just boggles the mind. So, you wonder why we pushed to topple the regime in Egypt and to allow the Muslim Brotherhood to take over. And then you look around and you find, well, the Muslim Brotherhood's got a pretty big presence very close to the center of power. We gave them their chance. Fortunately for most of Egypt, they blew it, and General Sisi seems to be at least a Islamic reformer, if not a thoroughgoing nice guy all around.
Well, he's certainly a stabilizing force. He has made it more difficult for terrorism to take over, basically, the land that is Egypt. And, of course, that's not what happened in Libya. Libya is a mess, and now we've got Syria is a mess, and chunks of Iraq are a mess, and they weren't a mess when George Bush left office and Obama came in, so we need to do our part, and maybe this is it, a little bit of audio, to make sure that legacy doesn't go away.
I think the message has to be basically threefold. To Putin, you take care of Assad and help drive ISIS out of Syria. We'll support the Kurds and drive ISIS out of northern Iraq. And to Turkey, you lay a finger on either of those buddies and you're gone.
I'm sure Erdogan would love to hear that. So
he needs to hear that, and we need to do something to shore up our base at Incirlik, where we can very quickly either disable or detonate any nukes that are still there and get all the people out in a hurry. And we need to give them the same message, which I believe we should have long ago given Afghanistan and Pakistan. When it comes time for us to leave, we will get unhindered passage, or we will scorch the earth all the way to the coast. Capisce?
Yeah. Well, again, carpet bombing, right? I mean, it's the same basic concept without the airplanes.
Yeah. I mean, but I mean, basically, at some point, you got to get out of these places. You got to get out without having yourselves, having a Vietnam, Saigon embassy moment.
Right. Helicopter people going, take me, and they can't. So.
Well, not even being able to take all of our own people.
Correct.
You have to make it clear. Don't mess with us. We're leaving. We're going to leave you alone, but don't you dare get in the way. And in most cases that'll work.
All right, we got about a minute. What do you want to wrap up?
And by the way, I read a piece today that I thought was pretty fascinating. Some of the senior politicians in Europe are actually rooting for the success of Trump, whatever they say publicly.
That's interesting.
Then you won't be able to push us around. We'll set up our own defense forces, and it'll be a glorious new day for Europe, if it doesn't implode, of course.
If it isn't overcome by refugees.
I also read today that Merkel is thinking of slamming on the brakes, that perhaps her popularity has plummeted too much. I think she's too late.
I think you're right. I think she's done. All right, and so are we. So I want to thank you so much for being available on short notice, and you have a great night.
All right. Well, back to being a revolutionary bum, maybe planting some different signs in the yard. Got to keep the neighbors entertained.
That's right. I got to keep them on their toes.
All right, Steve. Thanks.
All right, we'll see ya.
Bye.
Good night.